Well, come on, look how big I am, in particular my great big chest. Hello everyone, Mark here, Mark's Max Muscle, and today we are going to discuss Arnold's great big man's chest. Actually, the clavicle width, and he had a tremendously wide clavicle. This little region right here, not to be confused with V-taper, shoulder width, things of that nature. It has more to do with the size and width of the chest, and I have to admit, back in the day, it seemed like it was a main focus of all of these guys. Dave Draper, his clavicle, I think it was even wider than Arnold Schwarzenegger's. So, like I said, a lot of these guys back in the day, they all had big wide clavicles, including this gentleman here. Wow. Anybody at home know who this is? Big delts. Not to be confused, like I said, with the width of the delts, because he was famous for that too. But his clavicle was also very wide. Anybody? Come on. Don Howarth. So for those of you who did get that name, give yourself a little gold star. So that's a lot of wide clavicles. Was there any narrow clavicles? Of course there was. Look at these poor gentlemen. They're lined up like they're taking some sort of police photo or something because of their narrow clavicles. That's Ron Teufel, and of course the gentleman next to him. He doesn't even need to be introduced on this channel. I don't even want to say his name. You guys know who he is. His name's right there. Come on. Do I have to say it? It's Tom Platz. And there was Mike Katz there earlier too. But anyway, maybe a reason why Tom Platz never did win an Olympia title. And I honestly think it hurt poor Teufel. It's Tuffle? Teufel or Tuffle? I apologize if I got that incorrect. But I definitely think it hurt his placings. I mean, look at the guy next to him. Who's that? Jacques Neuville, I believe, and Serge Nubret. Oh my! I'm gonna have to delete that. It's Samir Banu, not Serge Nubret. I know who Serge Nubret is. I think it's because I said Jacques Neuville is a Francais name. You guys know what I'm saying. I know it's not Serge Nubret. I know Samir Banu and Serge Nubret difference. Anyway, to make up for that error, here's a blast from the past. Jim Hazlett. Jim Hazlett versus Ron Teufel. Now, if you want wide clavicle versus narrow clavicle, this is it. You can't ask for more than this. It looks like two different species all together. Of course, the interesting part is having a wide clavicle does not ensure your success as a bodybuilder. I mean, Jim Hazlett, he never won the Olympia, and neither did Teufel. Frank Zane did, though, and he had a pretty narrow clavicle, I have to say. I think when the late 70s came in, they were more focused on the detail and the condition, and it was less about the structure. I mean, Sergio Oliva, years before Frank Zane, he had a very wide clavicle. When I do the comparison, it is wider, but I'm surprised it's not that much wider. And there lies in the confusion. I mean, take a look at this side by side of Sergio Oliva and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm sure most people would think, oh, Sergio, he has a much wider clavicle. That's the V-taper. His midsection was half the size of Arnold's. If you look at the actual clavicle width, Arnold was a friggin' beast. I mean, his clavicle was probably wider than Lou Ferrigno's, and Lou was several inches taller. But I'm sure Lou had a decent clavicle as well. But Arnold wasn't the first bodybuilder with a great big wide clavicle. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself. This is Steve Reeves and John Grimmick. And I usually begin my videos way back in time, but I didn't. But this is maybe the very first ever battle between a narrow clavicle in John Grimmick and a nice big wide one for Steve Reeves. Not much of a V-taper there for John Grimmick, I have to say. And John always defeated Steve. And when you think about later eras, the 2010s, 20s, things of that nature, it was the smaller guys, like John Grimmick, defeating the guys with the superior structures, like your Cedric McMillans and like your Steve Reeves. So I think it goes in revolutions, doesn't it? I think we're We're heading back to the structures nowadays. But anyway, like I said, I do get ahead of myself. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves that we don't forget about good old Eugene Sandow. I have to talk like this when I talk about Sandow. I'm sure that's how they talked back then. Maybe he had a very narrow clavicle, I think. Nobody to compare him with. And he was the first bodybuilder. Look at that. Arnold versus Eugene Sandow. Wow. The history behind these two bucks. And what a good way to finish this video off. Oh, no? My editor's telling me no. Oh, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. Here's Lee Haney. In my opinion, he had perhaps the widest clavicle of all. Hear me out now. He was making a guy like Gary Stridham look like a beanpole. Can you imagine that one? Like a beanpole. And you compare him with the great Dorian Yates, and he is out clavicling. Is that a word? Well, it is now. He's out clavicling Dorian Yates, and as we know, Dorian, he had one of the widest, maybe of the 90s, I would say. It's definitely wider than Kevin Levroni's. Did Kevin Levroni have a narrow clavicle? No, somebody, they blurred out where they're holding hands. Somebody's a little homophobic. But anyway, actually, you take the measurements. Was Dorian's all that wide? Or was Kevin Levroni's maybe not all that narrow? Hard to suggest. Either way, Dorian Yates, he out-clavicled a lot of them, including Sean Ray and Flex Wheeler. But you know, Sean Ray, he's pretty short. And when you compare him with a guy like Flex Wheeler, they kind of have the same width. So I don't think Sean really had that narrow of a clavicle, but Flex Wheeler, he did. And when you compare him with the great King Coleman, and trust me guys, Coleman had a wide one. Clavicle. Very wide, in fact. And I'm sure you guys at home, but Mark's Max Muscle, Chompy Dompy Hair Fuchs had the widest. No, he didn't. Keep in mind, Coleman was shorter, and he seems to have about the same width. So, Flex Wheeler, try as he did with those delts, he might have been as wide, delt to delt, but when you look at the chest, there's just no way, shape, or form that he can compete with Ronnie King Coleman. And it's no fault of his own. That's no fault of anyone's. That is truly one thing that you cannot do anything about, is a narrow clavicle. Did Dexter have a narrow one? I don't think he did. Actually, this side-by-side comparison proves that he really doesn't. This is Lee Priest, the blunder from down under. And he knows me, you guys know. Lee Priest, he knows me. Well, he knows of me. Anyway, you can clearly see Dexter the Blade Jackson. Even if he does have a narrow clavicle, I don't think it's that narrow. A little wider here than the legend himself, Lee Priest. Now, one guy here in the center, you guys are going to get mad at me over, is Paul Dillette. And every time I say that he is slightly narrow, you guys get all over my case. Listen, he had some big delts. Sure. But his clavicle width was kind of narrow. And you can see that. Next to Nasser El-Sanbadi, who had a big, wide one. But, geez Louise, I'll be darned. Chris Cormier, very wide. Who's that guy? Off in the distance. In the background. It's Marcus Orul. And yeah, okay, he is stepping ahead a little bit of Paul Dillette, but still, imagine taking that big breastplate and putting it on Paul Dillette. Wouldn't fit. His collarbone's too narrow. So, having said that, Marcus Rule, perhaps the widest clavicle of all times. He's making Nasser El-Sanbadi and Jay Cutler, who's, he's no slouch himself. He's got one heck of a collarbone. But Marcus Rule, he's the top of the top. And you're going to do poor Lee Priest dirty like this. Actually, it's not. It's a narrow clavicle. We're not saying anything bad about the legend himself. But Mark's Max Muscle, he's shorter. Of course it's narrower. You make him taller, it's still narrower than Marcus rules. Marcus, no pun intended, rules the wide clavicle. And of course, that only helped with his monstrosity. But in a stark contrast, there was Branch Warren. Also a beast. Yes, both beasts. But in a side-by-side comparison from the same event, actually, you know what? Branch had he was able to hide his narrow clavicle in a lot of the poses. But so it's not quite a comparison that I thought from the 2009. See, I thought I was being clever using the same event. Actually, you know, Branch, he's not as narrow as I thought. You compare him with Dexter. Of course, Dexter, he's not opened up. Who's that? Who's that? Oh, here we go. It's Phil. Fiddler's Phil. Old Fiddler, hiding in the corner, because he has perhaps the narrowest clavicle that I've ever seen. And Phil Heath is also one of the most successful bodybuilders of all times. So does it matter if you have a small collarbone or a wide one? I guess it doesn't. Well, hold on a second. Whoa. Nobody's out there saying that Phil Heath is better than Ronnie King Coleman. It's not because of the condition. Phil was as peeled as they come. Arms are full, huge. Midsections, I might even be better either. Nobody's beating anybody on the midsection. All I am saying is the only difference was the clavicle width. So I think if there was a guy around like Ronnie King Coleman, same time as Phil would not have been Mr. Olympia, because it is a huge difference, lads and laddises, and it affects all the poses. I mean, you run through the shots no matter what. You guys in the comments section below, every time I do a comparison, Ronnie Coleman wins. And it's because he is twice as wide up top. You know, their height difference, it's not all that much. So, of course, all things equal, muscle size, condition, the bigger clavicle wins every time. But, like I mentioned earlier, also, guys, it does not ensure your success. Marcus Rule, Ronnie King Coleman, two of the widest of all time. One, multiple Mr. Olympia champion. The other, hardly even a top 6 placing at the O. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's Tom Platz and Fiddler's Phil, one of the most successful bodybuilders, multiple time Mr. Olympia, of course. And nothing for Platz. Top 3 placing on a weak Olympia lineup. Terrible. So, I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I would like to see these two dudes off all of the gear, born at the same time, just swimmers or something, so you could see their structures good and see the real difference. But wow, sure does make a huge difference in all of those front shots. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. Kind of matches that lower lat insertion versus highly inserted lat video. What's the difference? What's the difference between a wide and narrow clavicle? Well, Marcus Rule and Ron Tufel. That's your difference. Hit thumbs up on the video. Love and appreciate all of you guys, and have a fantastic day.